warm welcome and a heartfelt namaste. I, Anuradha, would like to thank all of you for liking, sharing, and subscribing to our YouTube and Spotify channels and writing in your comments and suggestions today. One of the major aspects of our life is education. In whatever we do, in whatever profession that we are, starting right from agriculture to any handicraft industry, anything that we want to do, a business, going into a job, flying a plane, anything that we want to do, we need to have a proper education in that area. So Jupiter in our charts are very important. For those who want to study further, who want to do their MS or MCom, or who want to do their masters, who want to do their research, PhD, Jupiter becomes extremely prominent in their charts. The few qualities of Jupiter that we will be seeing when we talk of higher education. So education is very strongly interlinked with Jupiter. First and foremost, Jupiter stands for knowledge. Jupiter is a planet that gives one many things, and I keep repeating them. One of the things that Jupiter gives us is knowledge in the field that it is. It is the Karaka of the ninth house. The ninth house represents knowledge. So that Jupiter, as the Dev Guru, also brings in a lot of good knowledge in our life and in our charts. Jupiter also represents good ideas. To be able to study something, to pin down what you need to study, you need to have some formative ideas in your mind as to what you want to study. Further, if you are wanting to do good research, you need to be able to pin down the area concerned where you would do good research. All the good researchers, when they started, they had a curiosity, they had an idea in their mind whether they would be able to nail down anything. So yes, a good Jupiter in your chart is very important for giving good ideas, ideas that can be converted into some substance. Jupiter, as the Dev Guru, gives one the intelligence, the planning, and the analytical mind to continue on with our process. When we are on a path of education, when we are on a path of research, this analytical mind, this analytical and logical mind, to come to inferences, to derive properties from that, what we see, is very important. For people who are into economics, for people who see the market, for people who understand behavior patterns, to be able to logically deduce something from those patterns is very important. And this is something that Jupiter gives us. If with Jupiter there is Mars involved, then this logical pattern becomes very strong, and the analysis and then the implementation of it becomes more strong. I have expounded on this theory in my Mars and Jupiter conjunction video. So if you haven't seen that, you should, so that you will understand that particular point in detail. Finally, we talk about the willpower. We have good ideas, we have a lot of knowledge, but we're lazy enough not to start something. That also is an expression of a poor Jupiter. On the other hand, people like Marie Curie, people like Einstein, no matter where they were driven by the need to research. They were driven by, or whatever circumstances in life they had. Lost your parent, lost your spouse, had to leave home and go away, but you were driven enough to follow your dream, to follow your idea. This is something that comes out of a person's willpower, and that is what Jupiter gives us. So this Jupiter, in fact, gives us the knowledge, the good ideas, the analytical mind, and the willpower, amongst many other things. Jupiter also gives us higher education, as that we have seen, and the ninth house is the house of our higher education. Since in the Kalpurusha Kundali, ninth house is governed by Jupiter, it is very essential for us to check that the ninth house is strong enough for us if you're going for higher education, for those who want to do their PhD so that they become professors. Again, it is very important to have a good ninth house, as well as a house that is, as well as a Jupiter which is aspecting the ninth house or is aspecting the third house. The ninth house is the house of intelligence, because as being ruled by Jupiter, one that takes us on the search of truth, and as our ability to understand things, to understand truth grows, our intelligent quotient also grows in life. When we talk about research, the eighth house becomes very important for us, because many a times we feel that we are driven by a certain, which can seem to be very illogical at that present moment, but we are driven to do or to find certain things by our instincts, and instincts are defined by the eighth house. When we are studying, any of us are studying, we would need to be away from the hustle bustle. We cannot go and study sincerely in 10 people. That is why isolation is required to do your work, to do your intense research. And that is when the eighth house is functioning for us, because the eighth house represents that isolation along with the 12th house. So the houses that are important when we are studying are definitely the fifth house, because fifth house also shows higher education, as it is related to the ninth house. It's the ninth to the ninth, which talks about the power. The second house, the first house actually, which is very important for higher education, is the ninth house, which is again the lauded by Jupiter in the Kalpurush or the natural zodiac. And finally, we have the eighth house for those who move into areas of research, for those who want to do great instinctual research and do something, find out something different. Eighth house is also very important. There is a difference between the ninth house and the fifth house. They can be paravidya, aparavidya, we can study. But for those who want to do a lot of research, even in the science, in the occult sciences, ninth house becomes important for them. Let us take a few charts. We've heard of the names of Einstein, Marie Curie, and for them, does it work? Does it show in their charts? And the D24. Why the D24? Because the D24 is our chart of education. Education, not the occult. So here we can have a look at the chart of Marie Curie. She has been, as we all know, 2 times Nobel laureate. So in her chart, if we see, Moon is the 8th lord, Jupiter, the Karaka of education, as we saw that it is important, is with Moon, the 8th lord. And we also find that this Jupiter also aspects the 9th house. Being in the 3rd house, it aspects the 9th house, and it also aspects the 9th lord. It is also with the 8th lord. In her D24, if we have a good look at her D24, we would be able to see that Jupiter is sitting on the Lagna of her D24, and that signifies and it is also in the sign of Sagittarius. So when we talk about signs, it's important to see Leo and Sagittarius and Scorpio when we are seeing these charts. So here Jupiter is sitting in Sagittarius, obviously aspecting the 9th house also. So we see in Marie Curie's chart that Jupiter aspects the 9th house, is with Rahu. Is being with Rahu a good place? Yes, it is good place, because Rahu gives the ideas a greater boom. It also gives, it helps the person to expand on the ideas that one has and to think differently. For a scientist, for a researcher, it is very important that one thinks differently. One is not following the trend of the public, because you will not be able to find something new in that case. When we talk about John Bardeen, again a 2-time Nobel laureate, and also one whose discoveries in physics were very important for radioactive, were made in the science or the area of radioactivity, and they were essential because whatever radioactive goods, electronic goods that we see today are based on his invention, on his findings, on his inventions. Again, for him, Jupiter aspects the ninth house. His lagna is the Taurus lagna, and Jupiter is the lord of the eighth house of for Sagittarius, and it also aspects the ninth house of Capricorn. It's an exalted Jupiter sitting in the third house. So when I was talking about people wanting to teach and become professors also, yes, the third house becomes important, and Jupiter for him aspecting the ninth house is also sitting in the third house. So he was extremely good a teacher also, or a professor also. When we move to his D24, we see that his ninth lord there becomes Mars, and Jupiter, as I told you, signs of Leo, Sagittarius, and signs of Scorpio are very important. In his chart, in the D24, the sign is Leo. Jupiter aspects his eighth house, which is the sign of Pisces, where we also say we find a higher connect. So yes, the research ability becomes very strong in this case. Again, this Jupiter is exalted in the D24 also. We can also take up the chart of Albert Einstein, which I have taken up many a times. You can also see the same thing happening in Albert Einstein's chart, where Jupiter in the D1 is in the ninth house, and in the D9 is present in the sign of Sagittarius with the 12th Lord Moon, and is aspecting the ninth house where Saturn is sitting, giving him very strong constructive ideas, which he was able to turn into. We can also take up the chart of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Many of us just think of him as a fighter, but how many of us know that he was one of the very few, or a handful few, who could get across the at that time known as national civil exams, which were written in London to be able to work as a civil servant in India. So yes, he passed that exam, those set of exams, and he passed it with flying colors. Though he refused to become a civil servant, as he said that he did not want to work for an outside power and wanted to make his country free. But in his chart, it's very evident that he was a highly educated and he was very intelligent, with Jupiter as the ninth lord sitting in the fifth house, though it was retrograde, and gave him an inner intelligence, which probably prompted him to go into another direction, and is aspected by Saturn. So whatever he thought, whatever he wanted, was something that he could implement. And this Jupiter in his chart aspects the sign of Sagittarius, which is the ninth sign in his chart also. And this Jupiter in the D24 sitting in the 10th house, aspected again by Saturn from the Lagna. The Lagna of the D24 is the sign of Sagittarius. Jupiter aspects Sun. Sun is the ninth lord in the D24 and is Uchchabhilashi. So we see the amount of intelligence that he has, and the need or the drive to do what he has and convert it into, to do what he has in his mind and to convert it into a reality for all concerns. I now take up a chart of a person who has passed her CA quite recently, and in her chart also we should be able to see that combination. We see that Jupiter, the Karaka of intelligence, is sitting in its own house in the 12th house of D1, and here it is associated with the ninth lord Mercury. And in the chart of D24, we see that Jupiter is in the fifth house, where the Lagna is Taurus. Jupiter is in the fifth house, and it aspects the ninth house, and it also aspects the ninth lord Saturn. This Jupiter-Saturn aspect is a very beautiful aspect that we will be making up a video on, because it helps us to convert our ideas into reality. Whenever we see a very good Jupiter in a chart, if we can see the similar position, a good position in any of the divisional charts, for example, D10 and D24, we should be able to predict that the person has a good future in terms of education and finance and job. Till we meet with you again,
बेल
stay
आइकन को
safe.
दबाएं ताकि आपको वीडियोस की अपडेट मिलती रहे। हमारे वीडियोस को लाइक करें, शेयर करें, उन पर कमेंट करें और हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें। लव यू।